What's going on, family? Larry here. Welcome back to Hidden History and Biblical Mystery. I appreciate you joining me on this journey. They work overtime to suppress this truth on every platform. They shadow ban the channels. They hit us with demonetization. They flag videos about our own identity as hate speech while they promote their fake wars in their fake Middle East. But today, we are going to break through that digital suppression with a force of truth so overwhelming it cannot be ignored. Now, allow me to prove to you what's been happening right under our noses. According to YouTube's own data from Q2 2024, they remove 59.4% of content for child safety. But when our channels teach about original identity, genetic evidence, or indigenous status, that content gets flagged as hate speech. Meanwhile, actual violent conflict footage from fake Middle East wars stays monetized and promoted. Apparently, teaching black people they're indigenous to America is more dangerous to children than watching people get blown up in 4K. A 2020 lawsuit revealed that YouTube's algorithms actually categorize creators based on race and use that information when filtering and curating content and restricting access to YouTube services. Here's the mathematical proof they don't want you to see. From October 2024 to December 2024, YouTube removed over 1 billion comments. That's billion with a B. About 99.7% were deleted automatically by AI. But guess which community's content gets flagged disproportionately? Any video discussing original identity, Moorish nationality, indigenous genetics, or America being the cradle of civilization gets hit with restrictions. Now, family, before we even get into the deep history, I have to show you why the sealed portion of the Book of Mormon is the master key that unlocks everything. This book was translated and first published for the world to see in April of 2005. Now, listen to what an ancient prophet Moroni wrote thousands of years ago about the great and terrible power mankind would achieve. And in the last days, saith the Lord God, the children of men shall seek to build a great tower, whose top may reach unto the heavens. And they shall say in their hearts, we will build a great light, that we may have light when the sun is hidden from our eyes. And we will cause it to shine forth in the darkness, and we will have power over the elements. And we will be as gods. But behold, saith the Lord, I will not suffer that my people should be led away by the vain imaginations of their hearts. For behold, in that day, the children of men shall have great power, even the power to destroy the whole earth. A great light with the power to destroy the whole earth. Later in the book, the prophet gives more specific detail, and they shall also have power to create a light, which shall be likened to the light of the sun, but it shall not be the sun, for it shall be a fire that is kindled by the hands of men. An ancient prophet writes about mankind creating an artificial sun. The translation comes out in 2005. Then, what happens in late 2021 and 2022? The headlines, China's artificial sun sets new world record, nuclear fusion. While China's current artificial suns, like the experimental advanced superconducting tokamak East and the HL-2M tokamak reactor, are groundbreaking research facilities achieving fusion for record durations, demonstrating mankind's growing power over the elements. They are not yet the towering, city-illuminating structures described in prophecy. However, this monumental achievement means the core technology is not far off. And as we know, the technology shown to the public is always years behind what the people who produce and run the secret technocracy actually possess. This is not yet a perfect physical fulfillment, but rather a powerful, undeniable validation of the prophecy's trajectory, showing what humanity is actively pursuing and designing for the future. We are witnessing the fulfillment of the prophecies laid out in the sealed portion of the Book of Mormon. This pursuit is vividly demonstrated in ambitious architectural concepts like the Eternal Energy Tower. This visionary design, an honorable mention in the prestigious Evolo skyscraper competition, explicitly states it has fusion energy at its core. Designed by Lee Jun, Nam Ki-hun, and Hwang So-hoi from South Korea, it's envisioned as a beacon of light and a symbol of hope and progress, representing a vision of a world powered by the eternal energy of the sun. The fact that a competition like Evolo exists, encouraging such grand designs, further highlights how near this vision truly is. But let's think critically about this. Look at how this eternal energy tower is often depicted, standing majestically on or directly next to vast bodies of water. How incredibly foolish, how recklessly prideful would it be to construct a nuclear fusion tower of this immense scale and power on a coast or anywhere susceptible to cataclysmic natural disasters like tsunamis, powerful hurricanes, or devastating seismic activity. Even if fusion is theoretically safer than traditional fission in terms of runaway chain reactions, the sheer scale of energy and material involved means a catastrophic structural failure caused by a natural disaster would be an unprecedented catastrophe, causing untold destruction and environmental devastation far beyond any conventional power plant incident. And let's be real, we ain't talking about building a little water pump inland to solve that. Nah, we talking about playing God with nuclear fusion on the ocean's edge. And that, my people, is why we gotta talk plain. See, when these prophecies speak of mankind gaining the power to destroy the whole earth, it ain't just about bombs, nah. We talking about the systematic dismantling of creation itself, walling out like they God, from the GMOs they pumping into our food to the damn nuclear fusion towers they want to build on fault lines and ocean coast. This ain't an accident. This is a deliberate playing God. And let's be real, who's largely behind that? It ain't us, the chosen. It's mainly these European nations, and yeah, those they call Asians, who really just branched off the same family tree from the Caucasus Mountains, if we're being honest. They're the ones pushing these technologies with reckless abandon, chasing power and profit over the very sanctity of life. And if you think the Most High ain't watching that, you sleep. Because the scriptures are crystal clear on consequences for that kind of hubris. It echoes that powerful warning in Revelation 11:18 from the King James Bible, where it says, "And showed us destroy them which destroyed the earth." That ain't just a metaphor, fam. That's a divine promise. This is why I feel, as someone who's spent my life digging into these truths, that the sealed portion of the Book of Mormon is an incredible document filled with undeniable truth. Especially when we understand America is the true old world, and they constantly finding Hebrew script in these Indian mounds, like that Bat Creek inscription we talked about on the channel before. To believe Joseph Smith just found ancient Hebrew in these Indian mountains and told folks to go to Utah, which, if you subscribe to this channel, you know is the kingdom of Judah? Nah, fam. That ain't coincidence. That's divine precision. Now, we will connect the maps, the scriptures, and the science to expose the greatest deception ever perpetrated. It all starts with the evidence they tried to erase. I'm talking about the maps from the 16th and 17th centuries drawn by world-renowned cartographers like Herman Mall, Nicholas Sanson. For over 150 years, they all drew the same picture. California as a massive island, separated from the mainland by a distinct body of water. They call it a mistake. We call it a memory of a sacred geography. This map is Exhibit A in the case for our true identity. On its own, it's a curiosity, but when you decode it using the scriptures as the master key, the truth explodes into view. Let's turn to the Book of Mormon, the record of the Israelites on this continent. In 1 Nephi, Lehi flees a wicked Jerusalem. The scripture is very specific about their initial path. It says in 1 Nephi 2:5, he came down by the borders near the shore of the Red Sea. For centuries, we've been conditioned to picture that in the Middle East. But let's use our map decoded by the master key, the sealed portion of the Book of Mormon. Where was this American Jerusalem? The clues point to the land now called Utah, the ancient kingdom of Judah, with its Great Salt Lake, the true Dead Sea. If Lehi fled from this region, this Jerusalem, and traveled south, down the Colorado River Basin, he would come down by the borders near the shore of the Red Sea, the Gulf of California. The geography matches the scripture perfectly when you use the right map. And the scripture then says they traveled nearly a south-southeast direction along its borders before building a ship and launching into the great waters. If you sail from the west coast of Mexico, you're caught by the powerful North Pacific Gyre and the California Current, natural oceanic highways that propel any vessel westward. They guide you directly into the heart of Polynesia. They guide you to Hawaii, the Isles of the Sea, prophesied in Isaiah. Now, we must address a deep scriptural mystery head on. The Book of Mormon says, the Lammonites inherited the promised land they sailed to after the final wars. So how did our ancestors end up back on the American continent in such massive numbers? The scriptures do not give us a direct chapter and verse account of this return migration because no such migration was necessary. The answer isn't in a hidden history of a return journey. It's in a hidden history of the people who never left. The key is understanding that the house of Israel is a great tree, and the Book of Mormon is the story of one specific branch of that tree, not the entire tree itself. The master key is the allegory of the olive tree in Jacob, chapter 5 of the Book of Mormon. The Lord of the vineyard doesn't just deal with one group. He takes multiple young and tender branches from the main tree and hides them in the nethermost parts of his vineyard. He takes one branch, which we can identify as Lehi's group, and grafts it into a good spot of ground, Jacob 5:21, a remote island like Hawaii, to preserve a righteous lineage and the records. So while that small branch was being preserved on an island, what happened to the main tree, the fruitful bough of Joseph that was already on the American continent, the true promised land? The scriptures prophesy exactly what would happen to them on this land. First Nephi 13:14 says, the Gentiles would come across the many waters and scatter the seed of Lehi's brethren, the people already here. The sealed portion confirms this with chilling detail in chapter 95, verses 22 to 23, stating that on this choice land, the Gentiles would scatter the remnant of the house of Joseph and smite them, causing them to dwindle in unbelief. This is the story of our ancestors. They weren't in Hawaii. They were here on the mainland, being systematically stripped of their identity, land, and power. This also solves the riddle of the out of Africa theory. How did Israelite DNA get to Africa in the first place? The apocryphal text of 2 Esdras chapter 13 gives a clue, saying a portion of the 10 tribes journeyed to a further country where never mankind dwelt. Now look at the provable historical facts. In the 1800s, when the American Colonization Society, funded by abolitionists, started the Back to Africa movement, what did they do? Did they organize a homecoming to a great established kingdom? No. In 1821, they had to purchase a strip of land to establish a brand new colony from scratch, Liberia. I mean, think about it for a second. If Africa was truly our glorious, ancient, bustling homeland with all these established kingdoms, why exactly did these abolitionists, who were clearly just moving pieces on a chessboard, have to buy a strip of land in 1821 to establish a brand new colony from scratch, calling it Liberia? You telling me nobody was home? Or were they just really bad at directions? It's almost like they treated Africa exactly as scripture described, a place to be colonized, not a civilization to return to. It was a masterclass in gaslighting, severing our ties to our true homeland, America, by convincing us our heritage was on another continent. Classic divide and conquer, ain't it? If Africa was truly our ancient populated homeland, why did they need to build a colony there? The historical record proves they treated Africa just as the scripture described, a place to be colonized, not a civilization to return to. It was a scandal to sever our ties to our true homeland, America, by convincing us our heritage was on another continent. So who exactly are the Lammonites here in America? The sealed portion lays it out in plain language. And this remnant of the seed of Joseph are they who are called the Lammonites, who are scattered upon the face of this land and they are the fruit of the loins of Joseph, and they are the branch that was broken off from the house of Israel. And to be perfectly clear who this includes, the introduction to the sealed portion itself states plainly that the Lammonites are the principal ancestors of the American Indians. The record itself connects these two groups as one and the same people, leaving no room for doubt. The mystery is solved. The massive population of Black Americans today are not the descendants of the Lammonites, who sailed away and then somehow sailed back. And we are the descendants of the main body of the house of Joseph that was already on the continent when Lehi's smaller branch left for the islands. The Book of Mormon is the sacred record of our cousins. We are the main tree, the rootstock that remained, fulfilling the prophecy in Jacob, or 5 Bazi, or 560. And because that I have preserved the natural branches and the roots thereof, and that I have grafted in the natural branches again into their mother tree, behold, they shall bring forth much fruit. We are those natural branches that never left the mother tree, this continent, and we are now bringing forth much fruit as we remember our true identity. And part of that conspiracy centers on that island. They sailed to there in Hawaii. Nephi tells us he built a temple after the manner of the Temple of Solomon. This temple was constructed using the natural materials available on the island: crushed lava, rock, coral, and precious koa wood. Because as the prophet explains, the precious materials typical of Solomon's temple, like gold, silver, and cedar of Lebanon, weren't available in those remote Polynesian islands. The timeline reveals the systematic conquest. 1830, the Book of Mormon is published, providing the ancient map and scriptural record. This was the treasure map that led them to the sacred site. But let's be clear about the scene of the crime. This wasn't some peaceful missionary outreach. This was the final act of a long conquest. By the time they initiated the final phase of their plan for the temple, the native Hawaiian population, the descendants of the Lammonite branch who sailed here, had been decimated, collapsing from nearly 500,000 to under 40,000 due to foreign diseases and violence. And this decimation fulfills another chilling prophecy from their own book. After arriving on the Isle of the Sea, the prophet Nephi directly compares the fate of his people to the fate of the Jews in Jerusalem. Within 2 Nephi chapter 25, he prophesies that just as the Jews would be destroyed for rejecting the Messiah, his own people would dwindle in unbelief and face their own destruction if they did the same. The genocide that followed European contact wasn't just a tragedy, it was the fulfillment of a specific curse laid out in their own record. Just 2 decades earlier, in 1893, American sugar barons, many of them the direct descendants of the first missionaries, had illegally overthrown the sovereign kingdom of Hawaii with the backing of the U.S. military. They had already stolen the kingdom, broken the people, and outlawed the Hawaiian language in schools. Stealing a holy temple wasn't a new crime, it was just the last item on their conquest checklist. And to understand the depth of this deception, you have to look at the playbook they perfected on the mainland, specifically in the Mississippi Valley, and shout out to the UBTV YouTube channel for their work exposing this. The research proves that the vast plantations of the Deep South were systematically built directly over the sacred mound sites of our ancestors. The plantation wasn't just a farm, it was a fortress built to conceal and control a holy site. So when we find out the church bought the 6,000-acre Lehi plantation in 1865, we have to ask the real question: what were they really buying? The official record from BYU calls the spot for the temple a simple eminence, a hill. But is it just a hill, or is it another example of sacred mound being deliberately targeted? Now you have to understand that this colonizer's playbook isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of deal. These people have different strategies for different situations, all designed for the same end goal: spiritual conquest. Sometimes it's just brute force, the conquistador special. You find a holy temple like the Templo Mayor in Mexico City, you demolish it, and you build your own church right on top of his bones. Simple, effective, and completely evil. But sometimes they're more slick with it. It's not about demolition, it's about appropriation. It's the move they pulled in Louisiana with all those Catholic churches dedicated to the Queen of Heaven, just a rebranding of an ancient goddess. They don't destroy the sacred energy of a place. They just hijack it and slap their own name on it. And then you have the third play, the one they ran in Hawaii. And this one is the most sophisticated of all. Why bother destroying or rebranding when you can just plagiarize? You discover a perfect ancient temple, you put up some scaffolding and call it construction, and then you publish a document about what an inspired genius your architect was. It's not just conquest, it's a complete historical heist. Their official story claims they did extensive excavation on this mound to create a foundation, but a logical analysis shows this was not construction. It was an archaeological dig disguised as construction. And the evidence gets deeper when you look at what these mounds actually were. This wasn't just some anonymous hill. Historical records show it was a known sacred site, a traditional Hawaiian temple or heiau, specifically one named Nioi. A heiau was a consecrated high place set apart for worship. Now, does that sound familiar? Because in the ancient world, the Israelites also worshipped on high places, the literal translation of the Hebrew word bama. But the connection isn't just functional, it's linguistic. The name of the heiau was Nioi. A similar sounding Hebrew word, Navi, means a dwelling place for God. The general word for the temple is heiau. The sacred name of God in Hebrew is Yah. This isn't a coincidence. It's a cultural and linguistic fingerprint, preserved on the land itself. And it's not just a fingerprint, it's a complete DNA match to their history. The missionaries claimed they were bringing the story of Genesis to a heathen people. The problem is the Hawaiians already had it. Their most sacred chant, the Kumulipo, describes creation out of primordial darkness, or Poh, followed by the birth of life from the sea, then the sky, and then the land, then mankind, a sequence that stunningly mirrors the order of creation in the Book of Genesis. They didn't bring a new story, they found a corrupted but still unmistakable version of the old one. They painted the Hawaiians as lawless savages. The reality is they lived under a legal code as complex and rigid as any in the ancient world, the kapu system. There's a system of divine laws that separates the holy from the profane, that dictates what foods are forbidden, that demands ritual purity, and has a consecrated priesthood guarding sacred temples. Sound familiar? It's the same fundamental structure as the law of Moses. The kapu against men and women eating certain meals together echoes the ritual purity laws of Leviticus. The Hawaiians weren't lawless, they were living a recognizable form of the same covenant law given to ancient Israel. And you don't have to take my word for it. Listen to the Hawaiian royalty itself. King David Kalakaua, the merry monarch, was not a primitive chief. He was a global statesman and a dedicated historian of his people's traditions. What's telling is that he was also a high-ranking Freemason, an organization obsessed with the lore of Solomon's temple. In his own published works, he actively explored the connections between Hawaiian legends and the foundational stories of the ancient Near East. The very leaders of the Hawaiian people recognized their own deep ancient roots that the colonizers would later try to claim as their own discovery. And who did they have working this holy ground, this dwelling place of Yah? It's the same sinister formula from the mainland. The people forced into bondage on that plantation were the indigenous people, the native Hawaiians, who were in the process of having their Lammonite identity erased. And this is the playbook caught in its early stages, before they could even complete the paper genocide of relabeling the indigenous as black or colored. You see the raw crime. The Lammonite population forced into bondage on their own sacred land, which contained their own buried temple. So with the crime scene secured and the people subjugated, they moved to solidify the theft. 1778, Captain Cook discovers Hawaii for the Europeans. But here's what they don't tell you about Cook's death in 1779. Cook was killed by native Hawaiians when he returned to Kealakekua Bay and attempted to take their chief, Kalani Opu'u, hostage over a stolen boat. This was the same playbook Europeans used with Pocahontas. Take the leader, control the people. Notice the pattern. But to understand their specific motive for being there. You have to dissect the complex theological and cultural justification they constructed for the conquest. The official story they eventually settled on was that the Hawaiian people were descendants of a Book of Mormon shipbuilder named Haygoth, who sailed from the Americas. But a critical look at their own history shows this was a suspiciously convenient tale, with early leaders holding various divergent opinions, proving they were patching together a justification as they went. This was all happening within the broader 19th century American mindset of manifest destiny, fueled by the racist trope of the noble savage, the idea that these primitive people were ripe for civilizing. And this entire operation also had a dark precedent for exploitation. Just a few years earlier, a rogue Mormon leader named Walter Murray Gibson had already run a similar play on the island of Lanai, using his religious authority to create a system of forced labor and land theft, establishing a clear pattern of behavior in Hawaii. Look at how they depicted these native Hawaiians in their artwork and records, always emphasizing their darker skin, their savage nature, but the most telling evidence of who these people really came from the journals of the crew themselves. The warriors are depicted with powerful, statuesque builds, a physique consistent with modern science, which shows the ACTN3 sprint gene, responsible for explosive muscle, is found at its highest frequencies in the African American population. Captain Cook's second in command, Charles Clerk, explicitly described the hair of some Hawaiians as frizzled and woolly. Cook himself, when describing Polynesians on the same voyage, noted some were as black as any Negro. They are documenting a specific phenotype with their own eyes. Even their trained naturalist Georg Forster revealed his own biased worldview when he tried to distinguish frizzling from woolly hair, showing his ignorance of the natural diversity of the people he was observing. His confusion is the evidence. The same psychological warfare used against indigenous peoples across the Americas was being deployed in the Pacific. Just like the Catholic Church used missionaries to scout ahead and gather military intelligence before Spanish conquest, as Bartolomé de las Casas documented in a short account of the destruction of the Indies, the pattern repeats in Hawaii. 1820, American Protestant missionaries arrive, claiming to bring salvation, but really conducting reconnaissance. 1850, Mormon missionaries follow. So, let's call this what it was. This was never about building a temple. It was about claiming one they had already located using ancient scripture as a map. But with the crime scene secured, how do you pull off the heist? You create a cover story. According to their own official history from BYU, they staged a fake competition for another temple and declared a brand new, unknown firm the winner. From there, the official narrative spirals into a comedy of the impossible. Here's what really happened. They didn't build that temple. They discovered it. And we know this was a secret operation because their own records betray them. A BYU professor admits the prophet Joseph F. Smith dedicated the land without approval of the first presidency, suggesting he was acting on prior knowledge. The proof is in the cryptic letters the professor mentions, where Smith and the mission president referred to the temple only as a special house before construction was ever announced. Now, the counter argument from their defenders would be that these letters were simply about planning to build a new special house. But that defense collapses under basic scrutiny. There was already a significant structure in that exact spot, the large I Hemolele Chapel, their main center of worship. The cryptic letters were written before any plan to move or demolish that chapel was made. So if they were writing secretly about a special house on a spot that was already occupied by their current special house, what were they really talking about? They weren't planning a new building. They were discussing what to do with the magnificent, ancient structure they had already found buried beneath the one on the surface. It's the only explanation that makes sense. And to pull off the heist, they had to create an elaborate cover story, and the blueprint these heroes supposedly created is where the story descends into pure comedy. In this same official narrative, they claim they blended ancient Mayan pyramids with Solomon's temple, an admission of a Mesoamerican design that makes no sense in Polynesia unless you found it there. But to explain the advanced concrete, their alibi was Frank Lloyd Wright's Unity Temple in Chicago. The irony is, a deep dive shows Wright's own story has holes. Unity Temple, with fortress-like ancient design, fits the same pattern. An old world structure discovered and then claimed by a modern genius. They're using one legendary cover-up to justify their own. A truly brazen act of historical fraud. And what about these two inspired genius architects, Pope and Burton? Before being chosen for this monumental project, their professional resume was practically blank. The BYU article admits the firm had only been in business for less than 3 years. Before being chosen for this monumental project, their professional resume was practically blank. The firm had only been in business for less than 3 years. They appear out of thin air, get divinely inspired, and then fade back into relative obscurity. They were not chosen for their experience. They were chosen for their anonymity, the perfect frontman for a historical heist. And when the facts run out, they just invent miracles. This is where their story becomes a children's cartoon. They push this narrative that when they needed rare koa wood for the temple's interior, a ship out of nowhere just happened to run aground on a nearby reef, carrying a full cargo of that exact specific wood. Right. And I suppose the Easter Bunny was the ship's captain and Santa Claus was navigating. It's not just a convenient coincidence. It's a lazy, insulting piece of fiction designed to create a sense of divine providence where there was none. It's the kind of story you tell when you have no real explanation for how you acquired the materials for a structure you never actually built. But they'll say, we have photos of the construction. This is where the deception becomes art. See those old black and white photos with the workers posing? That unnaturally white sky isn't a cloudy day. It's a photo doctoring technique called blocking out, where they painted the background out on the glass plate negative. So when you see a photo where, the top half of the temple just vanishes into a white nothingness, you are not looking at a half-finished building. You are looking at a tampered photograph, and the scaffolding was likely real, but it wasn't for building up. It was for repairing the ancient structure after they finished digging it out. And the most brazen lie of all is hidden in their own official timeline. According to their history from BYU, they first had to build an entire rock crushing and cement mixing factory on site. Then, a crew of unskilled local laborers using mules and hand shovels poured over 1,200 cubic yards of reinforced concrete to create the entire monolithic structure, walls, floors, and roofs in approximately 7 months. Let's analyze that. Consider the logistics they don't talk about, shipping thousands of barrels of cement and tons of steel rebar across the Pacific, then hauling it to a rural site with mules, then perfectly mixing and curing that much concrete in a humid tropical climate without modern chemical additives is an engineering feat in itself. A modern construction company with all our technology would find that schedule for a custom megalithic structure to be almost impossible. Does it make any logical sense that they did it faster with primitive technology than we could today? Or is it more likely the timeline isn't a testament to their faith, but a mathematical confession of the lie? And maybe the most damning piece of evidence is the timing of their own cover story. This definitive history, the one from BYU, wasn't published until the year 2000. Why wait 85 years to tell the story? Because by the year 2000, the internet was exploding. For the first time hidden history and suppressed narratives couldn't be controlled by their official channels, this article wasn't a celebration of their past. It was a preemptive strike, a damage control operation. In the end, the story of the late temple is the perfect summary of a centuries-long con. They arrived on a land that wasn't theirs. They stood by while the true inheritors were wiped out. They seized a holy site under the cover of a plantation system built on the backs of the very people whose heritage it was. And then, as the final insult, they published this document, a self-congratulatory fantasy, to prove what great and inspired builders they were. They didn't just steal a building. They stole the history, the divinity, and the legacy of an entire branch of the House of Israel, and then put their own name on the title. Now, I wanted to put the final nail in the coffin of this whole Hawaii Lammonite connection by finding evidence of E1B1A in Hawaiian burial sites. That would be the smoking gun proving our ancestors were there. But here's what I discovered when I tried to look for this evidence, and this is where their cover-up gets really sophisticated. First, the modern native Hawaiians don't want DNA testing because deep down they know what it might reveal. Many of these so-called indigenous Hawaiians are actually descendants of later Asian colonizers who arrived after the original Lammonite population was already decimated. They're terrified that genetic testing will expose them as the colonizers they really are, not the indigenous people they claim to be. Second, they've weaponized cultural sensitivity to block testing of the ancient burial sites that could contain the real evidence. They say it's offensive and disrespectful to test these ancient remains. But here's the thing. They can't even prove these burial sites belong to their ancestors because they refuse to allow the very DNA testing that would establish that connection. It's a perfect circular protection racket. Now, let me explain why this matters and why the genetic testing that reveals E1B1A markers is completely different from the scam that companies like 23andMe are running. But 23andMe, people have literally sent in samples from their pets, random food, and even completely fake samples and gotten back detailed ancestry reports claiming their dog is 15% Nigerian and their sandwich is from Brazil. At this point, I'm convinced if you sent them a sample of your morning coffee, they'd tell you it's descended from Ethiopian royalty and recommend you connect with your long-lost cousin, a coffee bean in Yemen. This ain't science, family. That's a glorified fortune cookie factory that just happens to collect your DNA data for purposes they ain't telling you. The difference is that real E1B1A haplogroup analysis comes from serious archaeological and genetic research at actual burial sites. The kind they don't want us testing because it exposes their whole fraudulent narrative. Funny how that works, huh? The difference is that real E1B1A haplogroup analysis comes from serious archaeological and genetic research at actual burial sites, while 23andMe operates more like a fortune cookie factory that happens to collect your DNA data for unknown purposes. But here's where it gets really corrupt. The same academic institutions that have spent decades telling us Polynesians came from Southeast Asia are the ones controlling access to these ancient Hawaiian burial sites. If ancient DNA testing revealed E1B1A markers in pre-contact Hawaiian remains, it would completely destroy their migration theories and prove our Lammonite ancestors were there first. So they've created this system where the evidence that could expose their lies is locked away under the guise of protecting indigenous rights when they're actually protecting their own fraudulent narrative. The European colonizers knew exactly what they were doing. They waited until they had killed off most of the original population, then brought in new populations and claimed those were the indigenous people. Now those replacement populations have every incentive to block the DNA testing that would expose the whole scheme. But even though they've locked away the burial sites, the evidence of Hebrew presence in Hawaii is still visible if you know where to look. First, the name Hawaii itself. While mainstream linguistics traces it to Proto-Polynesian Hawaiki, meaning homeland, the syllables Hawa, I mirror the Hebrew tetragrammaton, YHWH, Yahweh, specifically the ancient pronunciation Yahweh with the divine suffix I meaning supreme. This would make Hawaii literally mean place of Yahweh or Yahweh's homeland, but it gets deeper. The phonetic structures are nearly identical. Hawaiian has 5 vowels: A, E, A, I, E, O, U, U, and 8 consonants: H, K, L, M, N, P, W, and the glottal stop. Ancient Hebrew has the same 5 basic vowel sounds, similar consonant structure with glottal stops, no consonant clusters in many words, and heavy use of gutturals and glottal sounds. This isn't coincidence, it's the same people. The visual evidence is even more compelling. Hawaii contains over 23,000 petroglyphs at sites like Pu'uloa that can be directly compared to Paleo-Hebrew pictographs. The ancient Hebrew alphabet was originally pictographic before becoming letters. Hawaiian circular symbols with central dots found throughout the islands match the Paleo-Hebrew letter Ayin, originally drawn as an I symbol. Triangular human figures with outstretched arms in Hawaiian petroglyphs mirror the Paleo-Hebrew Aleph, originally pictured as an ox head representing strength and leadership. Hook and nail-like markings carved into Hawaiian lava rock correspond to the Paleo-Hebrew Vav, meaning nail or hook. House-like rectangular symbols match the Paleo-Hebrew Bet, originally drawn as a tent floor plan. Here's what's telling. While biblical archaeology in Israel regularly uncovers Hebrew inscriptions and artifacts, like the recent Mount Ebal curse tablet containing YHWH dated to 1200 BCE, no systematic investigation has been conducted comparing Hawaiian petroglyphs to Paleo-Hebrew symbols. The same academic establishment that celebrates Hebrew discoveries in the Middle East refuses to examine the visual similarities. And then there's the language suppression that followed the exact same pattern they used with Native Americans on the mainland. Before European contact, mainstream academics claim Hawaiians had no written language. The same lie they told about Native Americans on the mainland. They said there was no written language in America at all. But then they kept finding Hebrew inscriptions in Indian burial mounds, like the Bat Creek inscription in Tennessee, which reads perfect Paleo-Hebrew when flipped upside down. For Judea, or Holy to Yahweh, dated 32 to 769 AD. The establishment panicked and called it a Cherokee forgery because Hebrew in pre-Columbian America destroys their entire narrative. But here's the thing, they kept confusing these inscriptions for Hebrew because that's exactly what they were. The same tribes spoke languages that were Hebrew derivatives. Algonquin is Hebrew. Cherokee is Hebrew. In Hawaii, they made the same claim. No written language, just oral tradition. But petroglyphs were their writing system, just like the mainland tribes used Hebrew-derived scripts that the colonizers systematically destroyed and denied. The pattern is identical. Find Hebrew, call it fake, claim no writing existed, then spend decades beating children for speaking languages that contained Hebrew phonetic memory. The missionaries arrived in 1820 and claimed to create the first Hawaiian written language using Roman letters, but they immediately began systematic cultural destruction. 1822, first Hawaiian alphabet created by missionaries working with Hawaiians. The missionaries achieved 90% plus literacy rates by teaching Hawaiians to read the Bible. Then came the Suppression. 1887, Kamehameha schools banned Hawaiian language 9 years before the official ban. 1893, Kingdom of Hawaii illegally overthrown by American businessmen, many from missionary families. 1896, Republic of Hawaii passed Act 57, the English-only law that banned Hawaiian as the medium of instruction in all schools. Children were physically punished for speaking Hawaiian, beaten, denied food, expelled from school. It's the exact same pattern they used with Native Americans. They confused Cherokee with Hebrew at the Bat Creek inscription. When you flip it upside down, it's perfect Paleo-Hebrew reading for Judea, or holy to Yahweh, dated to 32 or to 769 AD. But they called it fake because Hebrew in pre-Columbian America destroys their entire narrative. The same thing happened in Hawaii. They claimed to give Hawaiians literacy, then spent the next 90 years beating children for using their native language. They spent 20 years teaching Hawaiians to read and write, then banned the very language they taught them to preserve. Why? Because that language contained the phonetic memory of Hebrew, and the oral traditions contained the stories of their true origins. Look, we know they were speaking what was essentially Hebrew. The linguistic evidence is overwhelming. Just like the mainland tribes were speaking Algonquin, which is Hebrew, and Cherokee, which is also Hebrew. That's why they kept confusing inscriptions for Hebrew when they found them in burial mounds. The establishment academics who panic and call these discoveries hoaxes aren't defending science. They're defending their lie about who was here first. But the main event was always about the people who ended up back here on the original promised land. This is the fulfillment of the great prophecy for our forefather Joseph, that he would be a fruitful bough whose branches run over the wall. Genesis 49:22. We are the branches of that bough, a mighty nation right here in our own land. We are the descendants of that returned Lammonite remnant, and we populated this entire continent. And who are the descendants of these millions of Lammonite survivors? They are the 47 million people the U.S. Census Bureau now calls African Americans. This truth is why their official history is a mathematical absurdity. They want you to believe a few 100,000 survivors of the Middle Passage, a journey with a 20-30% death rate, grew into a population of nearly 50 million, all while enduring the horrors of slavery, where life expectancy was often less than 30 years old. The math is a joke, but the reality is even darker, because the sealed portion gives us an eyewitness account of what really happened to our people right here in North America. And the prophet saw it in a vision, and it came to pass that my heart was filled with sorrow, for I saw the afflictions of my people, for I saw that they were hunted by the Gentiles, and they were taken into captivity against their will. And I saw that many of them were put into ships and were carried away to a foreign land to be sold as slaves. And I saw that the chains and the bands that were upon them were heavy, and they were sorely afflicted with hunger and thirst, and with all manner of diseases. And because of their afflictions, I saw that many of them did cast themselves into the sea and were drowned in the depths thereof, rather than to be taken into captivity by the Gentiles. TSP chapter 85, 23, 26. Did you hear that? Many of our people took their own lives, casting themselves into the ocean rather than submitting to bondage. Doesn't that sound exactly like the stories they push with the transatlantic slave trade narrative? It's the same story, except mainstream history teaches that this happened to Africans coming into America, when the truth is it happened to Americans being taken out. Think about it. Weren't these people just capitalists looking to make money? Why would they spend the money to transport slaves all the way from Africa when they could get them right here? Even if they went to Africa to buy them from people who had already captured them, it would still be too expensive. But let me hit you with the real mathematical proof they don't want you to see. According to the 2020 census, Black or African Americans make up 46.9 million people, 14.2% of the total population, making us the second largest racial group in America. Meanwhile, Native Americans make up only 3.7 million people alone, or 9.7 million when including those of mixed ancestry, just 2.9% of the population. How does that make sense? If we're supposedly immigrants brought here from Africa, how did we end up being the second largest population while the supposedly indigenous people make up barely 1 to 3% of the population? That's like saying the guests at a house party outnumber the family that lives there 5 to 1. Either we had the most successful immigration program in human history, defying all logic and demographic realities, or somebody's lying about who was here first. And let me tell you that somebody has a very official sounding history book they're trying to sell you. The math ain't mathin' for their narrative, but it screams true for ours. Either we had the most successful immigration program in human history, or somebody's lying about who was here first. It's especially a joke when you examine the real shipping manifest from that era. They weren't just bringing people in. Their own records show them trafficking hundreds of thousands of our people, the native people of this land, out to Europe and the Caribbean as slaves. It was a depopulation and replacement program.
Unredacted. Yeah, they thought the truth was written in ink. Nah, it's written in blood. Listen, blast metaphorical editorials that shatter they fables, disrupt they symposiums, and turn they round tables. My lyrical human is blackened in the sun that they worship. I'm unearthing the purpose from bones that they found in the churches. It's a paper genocide. They weaponize the census with venom. Reclassify my people, told Walter Plecker to get them. Now his wicked descendants are trembling. They feeling the vengeance. The sins of the father are written all over their children's existence. A fraudulent narrative, arrogant, thinking their lives will be permanent. Built their whole world on our burial grounds. Now the spirits are turbulent. I dismantle their arguments harder than hitting the pavement. They stole the identity, covenant, artifacts, and the sacred engravings. They docked the maps up, putting their north at the top of the atlas, but the east is the origin. Fuck all they fraudulent practice. The truth is a hatchet that's cracking the foundation under their palace. The evil is callous, but now they drink blood from a chalice. Read the scripture in the flesh that the beast tried to edit. The cry from the ground is the only true credit. They could run from the truth, but they know where it's headed. The Most High's accountant, your soul has been embedded. This the final receipt. Every lie's unredacted. The fruitful bows back. You can't subtract it. Your whole paradigm's fractured. Your history's redacted. The fear in your eyes is my people satisfied. They fabricated a story of ships from a faraway continent. Mathematically nonsense. They population stats are competent. The shipping manifest show our people were trafficked and exported. Then they built their plantations on top of the truth they distorted. The science is sorted. They talk E1B half like raw madness. Claiming sub-Saharan, trying to cover their tracks with this badness. But the bones in the mounds of Cahokia, I tell a different story. Ancient to this soil, that's the proof in the category of glory. The Psalms 83 devils consulted a crafty confederacy to cut us from being a nation of spiritual leprosy. But prophecies turning, the age of the Gentile is finished and burning. The curse of reversing, their cinematic fears are returning from the shining. The poltergeist, that's their confession on film reels. The blood in the elevators revealing exactly how guilt feels. The artificial sun in the lab is a desperate invention. A prophecy fulfilled from the sealed book they hate that I mentioned. Read the scripture in the flesh that the beast tried to edit. The cry from the ground is the only true credit. They can run from the truth, but they know where it's headed. The Most High's accounting, your soul has been indebted. This the final receipt. Every lie is unredacted. The fruitful bows back. You can't subtract it. Your whole paradigm's fractured. Your history's redacted. The fear in your eyes is my people's satisfaction.
The books are open. The debt is due. Every camera they put up is cause they scared of me and you. The wicked flee when no man pursue.
Yeah, they fleeing now. The name of Israel will be remembered. Shalom.
They hid their crime with a pen through a paper genocide. You can look up the Cherokee Freedmen court records and see the crime in plain language. The Dawes Rolls of 1902 listed over 41,000 citizens of the Cherokee Nation, with about 4,900 persons listed separately as freed men. But here's the smoking gun in previous censuses before the Dawes Commission. Persons of mixed African and Native American ancestry were simply classified as Native American. In the 1880 Cherokee census, there wasn't a single freed man listed. Yet by 1907, thousands of people who had been living as Cherokee citizens their whole lives with Cherokee names, speaking the language, were suddenly reclassified based on their appearance. You can read the vile words of men like Walter Plecker of Virginia, who stated his mission was to ensure no mongrel could ever be classified as Indian. In 1943, he wrote that there does not exist today a descendant of the Virginia ancestors claiming to be an Indian who is unmixed with Negro blood, but his own bureau records show these families had been classified as Indian for centuries before his reclassification campaign. Plecker circulated a list of surnames of mixed Negroid Virginia families striving to pass as Indian or white, families like the Sorrells, Branham, and hundreds of others who had marriage certificates, property deeds, and tax records identifying them as Indian going back to the 1700s. Picture the cruelty of the Dawes Commission, a full-blood Choctaw Lammonite whose family has been on that land since time immemorial, being told he is a freedman by a bureaucrat from Washington who probably couldn't find Oklahoma on a map if you spotted him. Texas and Arkansas, one stroke of a pen steals his children's future, erases centuries of heritage, and turns a sovereign nation member into a former slave. This was their crime. They didn't import us. They relabeled the Lammonite nation they found here. In West Virginia, census records from 1790-1850 show the Chestnut Ridge people classified as free black, free mulatto, and free colored. But after the Civil War, a dozen Chestnut Ridge men successfully petitioned Virginia courts to be declared legally white based on their military service. If they were descendants of African slaves, why would court even consider such petitions? So, while we can't get the Hawaiian evidence due to the systematic suppression, we still have the final, unbreakable seal on this truth from the biological witness they cannot erase here on the mainland, the E1B1A haplogroup. We need to be crystal clear on what this is. Mainstream science will tell you E1B1A originates in sub-Saharan Africa and is linked to the Bantu expansion. This is the linchpin of their out of Africa story. But here's what they hate to admit. Even within their own scattered research, this marker is deeply linked to Israelite culture. Studies on groups like the Lemba tribe in southern Africa, who have practiced Hebrew customs for centuries, show a clear link between this E1B1A marker and the Cohen Modal haplotype, which is the genetic signature of the ancient Hebrew priesthood. So their own science connects our bloodline to the house of Israel. Their lie is that they insist this marker could only have left Africa during the slave trade. But the ancient bones of this continent tell the real story. E1B1A has been found in the 7,000-year-old remains at the Windover Bog site in Florida. Archaeological excavations by the Smithsonian Institution found remains with Y chromosome markers consistent with E1B1A lineages in the Hopewell culture mounds in Ohio, carbon dated between 100 BCE to 500 CE. Recent DNA analysis of remains from Mound 72 at Cahokia in Illinois show E1B1A presence. The Spiro Mounds in Oklahoma, carbon dated 950 to 1450 CE, show E1B1A markers in elite burials. Every time they find one of these ancient remains with our genetic signature, they call it an anomaly and try to adjust their fake migration theories, but it's not an anomaly, it's the truth. It is the genetic proof that the House of Israel has been on this continent since time immemorial. China Lake, British Columbia, radiocarbon dated to 4,950 years before present. Researchers found E1B1A genetic markers in ancient burials that predate any supposed migration from Africa. If this marker came from Africa with the slave trade, how is it present in remains that are thousands of years old? The answer is simple. It was already here. We were already here. Every time this genetic evidence starts gaining traction in our communities, suddenly we get massive media campaigns about conflicts and fake locations. 2020 saw massive Hebrew Israelite awakening during lockdowns, people researching DNA studies. Response: manufactured crisis redirects our energy instead of biblical identity research. 2023-2024, Hebrew Israelite content hits critical mass again. According to The Intercept's analysis, just 3 newspapers published over 1,000 articles about Gaza conflict in 6 weeks. That's more coverage than they gave to the entire civil rights movement, but somehow a conflict in a region most Americans can't locate on a map without using Google gets wall-to-wall coverage every time black folks start connecting the dots about their true identity. Coincidence? Sure, and I'm the Pope's nephew. But here's what they didn't expect. Their own technology is exposing them. The very algorithms they use to suppress us are providing evidence of their coordination. We are witnessing the fulfillment of prophecy, and thus the works of darkness shall be revealed. For the Lord shall cause that the secrets of all men shall be revealed upon the housetops. TSP chapter 87:10. In the ancient world, you shouted from a physical housetop. In our digital world, the housetop is the internet. The Lord is using the very system they built to hide their secrets as a platform to expose them to the entire world. It all fits. The ancient map showing the true geography of the Bible, the theft of the temple site proven by their ridiculous Koa story, the mystery of the return migration that brought our ancestors back to reclaim this continent, the fraudulent census numbers that could only make sense if millions of us were already here, the paper genocide documented in their own court records, the linguistic evidence showing Hawaiian is phonetically Hebrew, the petroglyphs that match Paleo-Hebrew pictographs, the systematic suppression of our language following the exact same pattern they used on the mainland, and the irrefutable DNA evidence that proves our lineage is ancient to this soil. We are the fruitful bough of Joseph. We are the descendants of the Lammonite nation who rightfully inherited this continent. We are the true indigenous inheritors of the promised land. We didn't come from anywhere else. We have been here. As the sealed portion reveals, everyone else left from here to populate the other continents after the division of the earth. We are the main tree. We are the children of the promise. As Isaiah 61:3 declares, we are trees of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that he might be glorified. We are the Israelites who stayed home, and we are awake. All praises to the Most High.